Hey, so I'm gonna just get right to it. Um, my life from in my memory is sort of split into two sections: before and after. And sort of almost like, BC and AD, before the incident and after the incident. The incident that I'm going to talk about today occurred 14 years ago to the date in 2011. And that incident is an episode of brutal domestic violence that legally disfigured me and left me with chronic pain that I'm still getting physical therapy for. And that's just like, it's weird to me because you say that and people are like, oh, that's serious. But the emotional and the psychological stuff surrounding it, in my opinion, was so much worse, more devastating, um, and sort of sowed the seeds for me to return to this relationship after the incident over and over again until I finally left that area of the country. Gonna have to take a couple pauses, I think, because this is a little bit difficult to talk about, frankly. And one reason that it's difficult to talk about is I don't like showing any vulnerability. I don't want to be seen as a victim. I don't, and just, this is one of the worst nights, if not the worst night of my life. So it's difficult. But we're going to set the scene here. Um, I'm going to try, I'm just going to call him Jay so that I don't accidentally say his name when I'm trying to say a pseudonym or whatever. And Jay and I had been together, well, we started dating in 2009 and then broke up in 2010 because I up and moved to Colorado. That didn't stick, and 6 months later I moved back in with my parents, and that wasn't a situation that I wanted to be in. And I visited Brattleboro, and I said I was visiting my friends, but I was mostly just visiting him. And we got back together almost immediately. And his situation had changed in that he had an apartment for the first time. And, God, yes, and he had a job as a respite care provider. So what that is, foster parents, every couple weeks to give foster parents a break, he would host, a kid or somebody for the weekend. And because of his size, he is 6'4" and long-limbed and intimidating looking. So he was assigned the larger and older and frankly more aggressive autistic young men. And at the time, fortunately the attitudes towards this have changed, but at the time, he was taught several different kinds of restraints to use on these young men if they became violent. He never had to use them on any of the people who stayed with us, but he did use them on me before long. Okay, so he was also working on his master's degree in autistic studies. So he was under a lot of pressure, and he was very stressed, which contributed to that, plus the stimulants that he was using. I mean, I guess to a lesser degree I was using them too, but I was always a psychedelic person. And I guess, like, sort of while I was gone, he had gotten more into stimulants. I don't know, and I don't remember if mephedrone was already in the picture or not. But anyway, I got a job, my first real job, as a PCA, that's a personal care provider, or personal care associate, for the daughter of a friend of ours who had really, really bad ADHD and definitely some mood stuff going on, and definitely a lot, like, her mom was a nightmare. So for 4 hours, Monday through Friday, I would pick her up at the bus, and we would hang out either at the apartment, or the cool thing about this apartment was it was right on the edge of, like, a field, next to a babbling brook. And we would hang out there a lot. And I am going to talk a little bit more about that, just because that was so fulfilling for me. She told me, B, we'll call her B, told me that her previous PCA had quit because she was, like, too difficult or something. I never found her to be difficult. I didn't see any behavior problems. It was difficult to get her to do her homework, but, like, she was a sweet kid who definitely had a lot of trouble making friends because of her model for behavior, her mother. And she also was getting into the habit of lying. And just I want to brag about me for a second. So one time, I asked her how her day was, and she said she was going to be in a play. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. What's the play called? And she had to think about it, and then said something that was clearly she had made it up. And I just accepted that for the moment. And a little bit later, we were just casually hanging out and talking, and I was like, hey, Bianca, why do you lie sometimes? B. And she thought about it for a moment, and she said, well, sometimes I lie about things that I want to happen. And I was like, oh, so it's not so much that you're in a play, but you want to be in a play. And she's like, yeah. It's like, so let's write a play. And the remainder, I mean, we spent most of this time writing the play, which was, she created a character for herself, and then I sort of cycled through a couple different characters that were assigned to me. And we had a great time. But after a little while, her mom called me and was like, please don't bring B to the apartment. And I was like, why? It was like, because of the way that Jay talks to you makes her really uncomfortable. And it was like, fucking fair enough, because it made me uncomfortable too. So this was a process of dehumanization, honestly, and erasure that, oh God. So Jay also at some point stole my Adderall, and I did not know that, but that was a big trigger for this. I'm not going to call it a psychotic break, because there weren't delusions at that time. That came later. But it was sort of a manic episode. And it really centered around me just not getting anything right, I guess. Like, it was a 2-bedroom apartment, but I was not allowed to sleep in the other bedroom, even when we didn't have anybody with us. And I also wasn't allowed to sleep if he wasn't sleeping. Like, he wouldn't, if I was asleep and he woke up, he would wake me up too. And controlling somebody else's sleep and limiting somebody else's sleep is an effective method of torture. So let's see. Then most of our friends stopped hanging out with us because of the way that he treated me. And the only people who were still really coming around were high school kids. I don't know why he was like, he was friends with high school kids. He was like 35, who would come over instead of going to school, and they would like drink cough syrup and do drugs, and it was just really nasty. But at that point, I wasn't gonna speak out at all, because I very much blamed myself for the way that Jay treated me, and he blamed me too. And that was something that I was already primed for, looking back, because that was how I grew up, just like being mistreated for being autistic, basically, or not saying the right thing, or saying the wrong thing, or not saying something when I was supposed to, or using the wrong tone, or just being around my mom when she didn't want me to be, and then blamed for it. You know, if you hadn't done or said this, then it wouldn't have happened. So, and also, the gaslighting was incredible. Because, like, he would, you know, do or say something, and I'd be like, hey, that's not cool with me. Like, that hurt my feelings. And he would blame at the time, I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and he blamed that for everything. And he would convince me that my own perception of reality was so skewed that I had to depend on him and his perception of reality to know what was real. And that is a type of gaslighting that is so insidious, and it fucks you up for life, because afterwards you don't trust yourself. Then one time I like put like a candle and this statue of Shiva and a fucking candle like on a coffee table in the living room, and he flipped out and made me stop. And he was like, I don't want people to think we're Wiccan. I was like, I do practice witchcraft, but okay. And then I just wasn't allowed to have things in the common area. Eventually, I had to store all of my belongings in a plastic bin in his closet. I also have a lot of executive functioning problems, so like keeping a clean and tidy place is very difficult for me, and that was another point of contention where he would wake me up to make me clean. He would essentially like, you know, if you would just fucking clean up after yourself, then I wouldn't be talking to you like this. So, let's see. The week before the incident, there had been an altercation where Jay had used restraints on me. He had put me in a full Nelson, you know, had me on the ground, arms behind my back, his knee in my back, screaming at me, you know, I need more, that you need more medication and you're crazy and what's wrong with you or whatever. And this was unprompted. Then he was trying to force me out the door. I wasn't even wearing a shirt. He was trying to force me out the door, but he's also trying to slam the door while I was in the doorway. So I was just being hit by the door. And eventually I got out, and walked over to my friend's house whose daughter I was a PCA for, and, just sobbing, obviously. And a big part of this descent was witnessed by my best friend, Max, who really styled himself as this anti-hero who would never allow a woman to be mistreated, and he saw himself as like a protector, and yet he saw no problem with what was going on, and was one of my few friends who kept coming around. I mentioned this because I don't know if he was already there or if I called him and he came over, but he called Jay and was just like it was so clearly a performance. He was like, I am so psychotically angry. But didn't do anything. Another friend of mine, who I am still close with, who I love dearly, was passing by and sort of stopped in, and I told him what had happened, and he walked over to the apartment to talk to Jay. And obviously I was like, I'm done. I'm going. I'm leaving. I wasn't going to accept violence. And Cal stayed at the apartment with me while I packed until my mom came. And my mom remembers that he was just this steady presence who was like, he was just making sure that he didn't pull any of this shit again. But after a week with my parents, I was willing to do anything to get out. So Jay came and picked me up. And my parents were, at the time, they were like giving me $1,000 a month. And they told me they weren't going to do that anymore. That was all they could really do to stop me from being there. I was just like, fine, I have a job. For which I never was paid, actually. Anyway. The night of the incident, I mean, we had, and Jay had started drinking again, which he had largely stopped doing when he and I got together, because I didn't drink. I thought alcohol was stupid. Like, why would you waste your money on something that just that shuts down your frontal lobe? Why would you do that? But he was drinking heavily, and Max was and is an alcoholic. And I started drinking every day too, more and more heavily to cope. And that night we went out, and I guess manipulated a friend of mine into, like, we broke off from them, and we went back to his place and had a thing, and then I left, and he was like, oh, you're still Jay's girlfriend, aren't you? And I was like, yeah. So I went back to the apartment. It was 3 a.m. at this point, hoping that Jay would be asleep. And of course he wasn't, because he wasn't sleeping anymore. He was waiting. And I was drunk, so was he. So I don't remember a lot of the details of the argument that we had. But he eventually told me to go sleep in the field. Like, you can't, I'm kicking you out, go sleep in the field. And I was like, yeah, okay. So, and then he called my mom in the middle of the night to tell her that I was sleeping in the field behind the apartment. Not that he was making me do it, just that I was out there. And my mom called, and I was just like, yeah, this was such a huge mistake. Can you guys please come get me in the morning? I'm so sorry. And so I was in the field, and then Jay took my dog Dozer to find me. And I had noticed that he had been trying to train Dozer. He would be like, Dozer, find Deirdre. And Dozer was just like, why are you talking to me, dude? But he was trying to find me. And I was not that far from the entrance of the field by the creek. And I know that Dozer knew that. He, but he took Jay way yonder to the opposite side of the field. And I like to think that he knew what he was doing. And that gave me time to go inside and start gathering my things again. But when Jay got back, I'm not sure if this was immediate or if there were more words exchanged before this happened, but I ran away from him. I think it was as soon as he got back. I ran out. And there were two entrances to the apartment. One was onto like a little balcony that had steps going down. And I almost got to the steps when he punched me in the back of the head and knocked me out. I'm not sure if it was the impact from me hitting the floor that broke my front tooth or not. Or I think actually it might have happened later, but I was out. And when I came to, he was dragging me back into the apartment by my hands. And I was like halfway in and halfway out. When I played possum because I was afraid of what he would do if I did. But that was a mistake too, because he sort of straddled me at that time and started sort of patting me, like wake up, trying to get me to wake up, and that turned into open-handed slaps, and that turned into closed fist punches, and I think that's how I lost the front tooth. But I don't know because I blacked out again. But once he thought that I was dead, he called the police. And I heard him say, I punched my girlfriend in the back of the head. And I got up at that point and took the phone from him and was like, we're fine, and hung up. Oh, God. Fortunately, this was Vermont. And they take this shit so seriously. 7 officers showed up. And obviously took him out. And took my statement. And I was not cooperating. I refused to go to the hospital even. And they tried to do, we're not giving you a choice. You have to go. And I happen to know that they can't do that. It's you can't drive me to the hospital unless I'm unconscious. You need my consent to treat me. And I'm not giving that to you. And I gave a statement that protected him. Said something he decided that he was going to restrain me. I was successfully restrained. So that was it, my parents got me the next morning. Never got my head or neck looked at. And just moved into my parents' basement and rotted. 8 months. I did not deal with the trauma. I had a psychiatrist who I was seeing twice a week, but we never talked about it. Which was weird. He also not long after that, I started having horrible back pain every time I tried to do something. And I didn't fucking make the connection because it was well, he didn't hit me in the back, but he it was bad. And I was talking to my psychiatrist about it, and he prescribed me Vicodin, which is not allowed. Psychiatrists are not meant to be doing that. I think that counts as malpractice, frankly. And I know that he did it to see if I had it was to see if I had addictive problems. But I was fucking newly traumatized, so yeah. That's another story. But, also, I'm really proud of myself for this. This was, again, 2011, and about, 3 days after I got back to my parents' place, I got on a train and went to Occupy Wall Street in Zuccotti Park. And had a blast. And that was great. I guess that's another story as well. Fortunately, even though I didn't press charges, the state did. That's one of the things that's cool about Vermont. Um, but I didn't help. Like, I could have gone and testified. And he never went to prison. I don't know how. Especially because, like, not long after that, he was caught, like, selling LSD to one of his kids that he worked with. But his career as, like, an educator or, like, a substitute teacher or a respite care provider, that was destroyed because he was a felon. But there were, yeah, that was that. And then Max, first of all, Max, like, got revenge on my behalf by sparring with him. Like, they went to this, like, a fencing club that was sort of like a mixed martial arts thing. And Max apparently just, like, sort of squared off with him and didn't even beat him up, but just won. And that made Max feel better, and then they were buddy-buddy again. But then also, Max moved in with my family. He rented a room from my parents while I was there, and I just know he thought that was his chance because he was kind of in love with me, and, like, they had both become really into the X-Men First Class, and, like, seeing it as a metaphor for autism, which is great. It's a good movie. I like it. I get the metaphor. It's pretty cool. However, they both cast me as Mystique, and just real quick, it's this love triangle between Mystique, who is nothing like me and doesn't even really get a personality, Professor X, who is, like, doesn't treat her well and wants her to cover up and not be visibly interesting, and Magneto, who, is, Max even quoted Magneto and was like, "All your life, the world has tried to tame you. It is time for you to be free." Except they both wanted to be Magneto, which, God, and I was Professor X. It's just... Anyway, it was silly. And Max didn't overstep or force anything on me. He was also not a good friend. It took me a long time to realize that. He did not see me. He used to joke that, like, I was like his Tyler Durden. He saw me as, like, a character, because he was an author. Bad author. And he saw me as this. I had this persona. I had this indestructible, badass, rough and tumble, like, persona, and he just bought that. But would be casually cruel, shut me down, and he wanted me to go back to Vermont and get back together with Jay, which is what happened. I'm not blaming Max for this because I made my decisions. However, I am really confident that if Max hadn't been goading me on, trying to convince me to do this, I do not think that I would have let Jay back into my life. But I knew that Matt didn't want to be in Sleepy Hollow. He was miserable there. He didn't have any friends, and he wanted to go back home. But he didn't want to go back home without me. And, I was so comfortable being a supporting character in other people's lives that I just sort of let it happen. And I'll go into this, I think, actually. That was around the time that I was declared disabled, due to that incident, but also just, like, my own mental illness, which was, again, I really wish that, I'm glad that happened, but I really wish that my mom hadn't been made my payee, and I tried really hard to make sure that didn't happen, and I'm still trying to remove her as my payee, but that happened, and it felt like a week after I started after I was like declared disabled and got my first disability check, that Jay showed back up. And I'll end this soon, but like when Jay came down to visit, and his dad had died and left him a trust fund and a bit of an inheritance and some heirloom jewelry and stuff, and he had never had that amount of money in his life, and that almost immediately triggered another manic episode. But we were cuddling, and he was like, I think you could say I'm doing pretty well for myself. And I was like, yeah, of course, yes, you're doing so great. I love you so much. You're doing so great. I was all fawn trauma response. I would have said anything to convince him not to hurt me, And then he sort of got thoughtful and said, I don't think we could say the same for you. I mean, yeah, no. I'm not doing well for myself because you almost beat me to death. Anyway, the follow-up to this is some of the most ridiculous shit ever. I think I'm gonna make that video right after this, honestly, because it's so silly. He really wanted to be this big man, and like he had a nice car that his dad had left him, but he bought a truck that a stick shift truck. He could not drive stick. He got one of his fucking pawns to drive it for him. Oh god. I shouldn't get into this right now, but like the dehumanization, I was just an object to and Jay eventually, he wanted to be a cult leader. He didn't get there, but he did convince a couple of young autistic men to follow him around. And I didn't realize at the time, but I realize now, one of the reasons they made him their king was that he had a hot girlfriend. None of them did. But that was it. I was Jay's hot girlfriend. And I was his. And they didn't even really talk to me much. Not long after we got back together, he and I and the pawn who drove his truck and a couple other people went to this waterfall. I think Jesse wanted to do a photo shoot because that was one thing that we would do. He would take pictures of me. And was being so cruel, just casually cruel. And said something awful. And I made a dig at him back. And in response, he said, "You are being ostracized from the group." And he went off to the other side of the area. And they all went with him. That was almost, I don't want to say more traumatic, but like just as traumatic as the way that he was treating me was the fact that there were people who I thought were my friends, who I trusted to speak up if it, and they just didn't. They just let it happen. Especially Max. I guess I'll wrap up because it's half an hour long video. 14 years later, I am doing really well for myself now. I own my own business. I'm writing a book, and I'm living my best life. I'm getting physical therapy. Finally, dealing with some of the long-term consequences of that beating, which included, like, I believe at least, damage to my vagus nerve that caused serious back pain and gut pain that remain. As for Jay, I don't care. I don't wish him ill, but I wish him away from me forever. All right. I think that's it. I love you, Internet. Thank you for coming to my trauma dump. Okay.